Good morning. I'm Bill Looney, Executive Editor of InVivo. Welcome to this Informa Pharma Intelligence webcast on the new U.S. administration of Donald Trump. 6 months in. 6 months that to some may seem like 6 years. We have an abundance of personalities and distractions, and a few significant accomplishments. So as we start, there are two fundamentals we think are important in evaluating what this new administration means for the biopharma medtech industry. First, this industry, and healthcare in general, is a resilient industry. Over time, drug and device companies have shown they can adapt to all kinds of external shocks and pressures. Second, changes in healthcare happen slowly. It gives companies time to react, engage, and adapt. The pharma business is a long game, and it will last beyond this administration. So let's get into the game now, and here's our agenda today. As you can see, we are looking at issues from the perspective of the C-suite. The role of the C-suite has changed from that of a functional taskmaster to an internal facilitator. It's to help business units work more closely together in an integrated way across functions. This is not how Washington works today. In many ways, we are looking at two solitudes, and that's not good for policy. So one thing we have done is ask you, the audience, two polling questions designed to help give the political class some direction as to priorities, and we'll get to those in a moment. Now let me introduce our two sector analysts joining me today. The first is David Fillmore, who edits our MedTech Insight, which provides daily in-depth intelligence on the medical device and diagnostic sector. And next is Matt Hobbs. Matt is executive editor of the Pink Sheet, the publication of record on biopharma regulatory affairs. So welcome, David and Matt. And now let me just put a slide here to provide a bit of a context for the policy review today. We put together this slide to highlight what the industry should expect from its political leadership and its institutions. I call them the 5 Gs of good government. The first is growth. It's simple. Healthcare is now a public good, and it's increasingly about redistribution. The bigger the economic pie, the more resources there are for medicine. Now, Trump has delivered a solid economic performance in the first 6 months. Unemployment is at a 16-year low, but the U.S. could be doing better. We have a productivity lag and a reluctance of business to invest. Getting something done on taxes, trade, and healthcare, which alone is nearly 1/5 of the U.S. economy, could push real GDP growth beyond 3%, and that'd be truly transformative. The second is governance. Legislation that succeeds in Washington tends to be bipartisan. Look at the Medicare drug benefit adopted in 2003. It was passed by a GOP administration with the support of 11 Democrats in the Senate. It remains in place today. There's a lesson to be learned here. And third is grounded. What's your bench strength? Who gets things done and where? 10 of the 15 cabinet departments are today operating without a deputy secretary, and that's the man or woman who makes the trains run on time. You can't execute one of those 42 Trump executive orders without the deputy's team of political appointees to ride herd. Fourth is global. Business outside the U.S. is a participatory exercise. When the Trump administration abstains, others are ready to replace us. There is still a thing called national champion. Fifth is gravitas. The U.S. presidency has only 3 enumerated powers. The office is what the holder makes of it. And what to make of Trump's 1,039 tweets so far? It corrodes all the latent, contingent powers of this office. Anyway, this is not the way the C-suite operates. Translation is required. So let's start here. We have a poll question, and the poll question is posed: which of the following Trump policies is most critical to preserving industry's basic license to operate? Now, we give you 4 choices, and we'll take a second or two to register your vote. Do we have an answer to the poll? Well, I guess we'll have to get to that result later. But anyway, at this point, it's a good point to turn things over to our two panelists today, David and Matt. So I want to turn it over to, I guess, David first.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the introduction, and I think a lot of good points made so far. The first thing I wanted to delve into is, and I'm looking at things, I'm an expert in med tech, but I'm looking at things more broadly for the healthcare products space. And I think, obviously policy specifics are important, but I think for this administration, one of the most important elements to keep in mind for businesses is just the basic unpredictability of the administration. I think that's key in sort of getting a sense of, you can't really tell what's going to happen from day to day, and that's a recipe for jarring policymaking. The Trump administration, in general, has put more of an emphasis on deal making versus building on precedent and ideology. And I think that's had an impact so far on a lot of issues across the board for many industries, including medtech and pharma. At the same time, many of the stated goals of the administration, things like cutting back on regulations, tax reform, corporate tax cuts, are things that would be supported by industry. But the question really becomes, will these goals translate into practical reality? In some cases, it may be yes, but in many cases, it's still cloudy. One example I wanted to put out there is just an example of where some of the, the unpredictableness, unconventional element of the administration has, split into issues specific to pharma and medtech is the user fee process and budgets and the budget process. Every 5 years, as I'm sure many listeners know, is the reauthorization of user fees for FDA review of drugs, devices, and so related products. It's an opportunity for sure to debate issues about the FDA, but typically, particularly in recent cycles, has been relatively uncontroversial subject. And this year's, in a sense, to some extent, no different. Is that the agreements between pharma and medtech are strongly supported by industry, by FDA, and actually by many members of Congress as tools to improve efficiency of review, enhance policies, hire more experts, etc. But at this late stage in the game, it is considered a late stage, we still don't have an approved user fee bill. And that isn't, as I said, due to lack of support, but it has a lot to do with the sort of, the misfiring and a lot of disorder in the legislative process, a lot of boom and bust approach, I would call it, to legislation in Congress in terms of the health care bill, which we can get into, and many other distractions have sort of kept this user fee bill from the floor. At the same time, the administration has come back with requests in its budget process related to wanting to increase user fees, double them, well beyond what was in the agreements between industry and FDA, and that's led to some confusion and uncertainty. So at the end of the day, people still believe this will pass before the current program fully expires in September. But, it's still, one can't predict for sure, and it's still certainly an area of unsettledness that is not ideal for business planning. Similarly, in terms of, disorder and sort of unpredictability, obviously the ACA Obamacare repeal efforts, which, every week, every day, what's going on there has been sort of hard to know what's going to happen next. And so that's another area where I'd say, it's really been a little bit jarring. And just in general, obviously, all the investigations, not necessarily healthcare related, but that is a distraction from policymaking. On the flip side, one big win for industry so far, I think, overall, has been the appointment of Scott Gottlieb to be the Commissioner of FDA. While that could have gone a number of different directions, that appointment, it ended up with someone who really knows the agency well, supports innovation. Nonetheless, there's still some questions about agency focus, what the agency's focus will be during his tenure, as I think Matt will highlight a little bit later. So overall, I think there's some areas for concern in terms of the administration's ability to produce big legislation, and so that are they going to be able to get to priorities like tax reform, and what's really going to happen next in terms of things like drug pricing or medical device tax. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, even more than usual, I would say. I think there's questions around free trade versus protectionism that are worth watching, and just in general, I think there's this unexpected. What's going to happen next is just a constant, ever-present question. What's the next shoe to drop or tweet to come out? So that's to me overall important picture to keep in mind when talking about the impact of the administration on industry. Next, we were going to touch on some more specific issues, some more specific topics, starting with FDA. Since I am talking, I'll go into some points from the MedTech side, and then give Matt a chance to really dig into to FDA Pharma issues. So overall, to take, as I said, Scott Gottlieb is appointed as the FDA Commissioner. I think so far that's generally been seen as a pretty good sign from an industry perspective. On the device side, there's really a positive feeling about the direction of things. Things aren't perfect, but Jeff Shuren, who runs the device center, is seen as really pushing things in the right direction from an efficiency, transparency standpoint. A range of policies, including getting new trials off the ground quicker, are happening, and I think the expectation is that Gottlieb will continue that course and potentially accelerate it to some extent. The biggest industry priority is for sure implementing user fees. That includes things like new performance goals, investments in staff, continued scrutiny of FDA's review process to ensure it doesn't go south, go the wrong direction, and many other things. Really getting that implemented is the key thing. I think there's trust in Gottlieb to do that, but as I mentioned already, it's really up to Congress right now to get that through. So in terms of specific things on the MedTech side that Gottlieb might have his fingerprints on that he has a priority in are, I think, any issues related to patients' unfettered access to their, having unfettered access to their own data. So that there's a few areas where that's relevant. In particular, digital health is a big one, as well as diagnostics, in particular direct-to-consumer diagnostics genetic screening, where I think in both of those cases, Gottlieb is pushing and will push for minimizing FDA's oversight and sort of their direct actions, particularly digital health. He's been active on so far, signaling a plan to really sort of keep FDA out of it as much as possible, both implementing some things that Congress has passed as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, but going much beyond that to come up with sort of new types of approaches that would get digital health and software to the market much quicker, and so that's something he's really moving forward on, and I expect to see a big impact over his tenure. There also could be some impact on clinical trial development. So there's a number of things to watch for. But so overall, positive for MedTech. I think now would be good. Let's go over to Matt. Matt, how are things looking at pharma? I guess there's some positives also, but maybe also some questions.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Great. Jumping ahead of myself here on the slides. We'll get this straight momentarily. You were mentioning about Jeff Shuren, sort of the counterpoint on the drug side is Janet Woodcock. You've made some excellent points about how unpredictable and unusual the environment is in Washington right now for medical product companies, and Janet Woodcock is sort of the person that pharma can rely on to keep everything running smoothly, and she is now even more important than she had been in decades past. She is running the Office of New Drugs, essentially acting once John Jenkins retired at the beginning of the year, and she has some very interesting reform ideas on that, sort of kind of trying to better integrate how reviewers sort of kind of work on things, maybe sort of kind of reorganizing how they focus on sort of kind of more specialties than simply sort of looking at statistics. They want sort of statisticians sort of to specialize more than they have been perhaps in sort of each other skill set to specialize as well. And her hope is that will sort of drive a lot of efficiency, and hopefully industry will see that once she gets those reforms off the ground. The question, of course, is looming over everything for pharma is, when's Janet Woodcock going to retire? We have compared her, excuse me, to Queen Elizabeth. She's essential. She's incredibly competent. She's enormously vital and obviously sort of doing great things. But there's no obvious successor to her, and the same could have been said about John Jenkins, and when he stepped away, Woodcock stepped in. And so what happens if Woodcock steps away? And that's a real unanswered question for industry at this point. But day to day, they're very happy with her management and her more direct involvement with the Office of New Drugs. And Dave, building on what you said about user fees, there's going to be a lot more stuff for drug companies to be excited about once user fees is reauthorized. We just did a story that came out in our email this morning about how technically FDA is supposed to tell user fee supported staff that they might be furloughed if the user fee reauthorization isn't passed by the beginning of August, since they have to give 60 days notice. But FDA decided that, we're pretty certain it's going to pass, so we're not going to actually issue those furlough warnings. So people are pretty excited about this next round taking off, but there is still this this looming uncertainty because of Congress's inability to act on that so far. But once user fees is reauthorized, and everyone expects that they will be, there are three big new things that folks can look forward to in the next round of the user fee program. The first is increased use of real-world evidence. FDA has been instructed to develop a framework. They haven't been instructed by Congress to actually rely on that data for approvals, but everyone's hope and supposition is that once they develop that framework, it will naturally lead to more approvals based on real-world evidence. So that's not going to be quite the panacea that one could imagine it being. It's still going to be tricky to gather that evidence, just like it's tricky to gather clinical evidence now. But it does give pharma another option to develop a data set that can be used to at least supplement approvals once they've gotten into into the marketplace, and a better sense of how they're being used and how they're actually useful is ascertained. The next big improvement for companies is patient-focused drug development. The idea is that pharma should be listening to what matters to patients, and that FDA should be approving products based on that. And again, this is going to be a shift in the way that the drugs are developed, and the hope is that it means that they can be developed more easily, more quickly, more cheaply, and matter more to patients, and that leads to more valuable treatments, and whether that helps adherence, whether that helps market value, that's really the down the road questions. But the idea is that no longer will it simply be clinical or laboratory endpoints that govern whether or not a product is developed or approved, but what patients say matters to them. And FDA doesn't necessarily have to base their decisions on this, but because of the instructions in the user fee agreement, it means that they will be thinking about this more and more, and hopefully that'll lead to smoother drug development once that takes off. The third big win for pharma as part of this reauthorization should be a stricter schedule on guidances. There's a lot laid out to say FDA has to issue something in 3 months, and then it's 3 months after that it becomes final. That's obviously a very fast timeline, and it's likely that FDA will meet those that sort of that kind of goal. But there is sort of kind of within a year or two sort of kind of a strict schedule that sort of kind of the FDA does sort of kind of have to sort of kind of march these things out as opposed to letting them languish for years and years. It sort of has been the case, and the trade-off for pharma is that sort of kind of that they are paying more in user fees, not as much as the Trump administration would like them to be paying, but they are sort of putting more money into this project. So hopefully it'll pay off and sort of kind of in more clarity as to sort of kind of what the agency expects from them. And I wanted to second what Dave was saying as Gottlieb being a big win for pharma. He maybe would have been the FDA commissioner under Romney. His disclosure sort of when he was being nominated of sort of his campaign contribution sort of suggests that he was sort of kind of maybe thinking the same in terms of sort of kind of the donations he made to the Romney campaign. So he was obviously sort of kind of the generic Republican first choice of commissioner. So sort of pharma couldn't be happier with that selection. He's a very very devoted, very knowledgeable, and extremely energetic, and obviously sort of kind of dedicated to making sure that the industry operates smoothly for medical product sponsors as well as sort of kind of fulfilling its public health missions. I wanted to flag, three potential wild cards, wrinkles that sort of kind of that maybe wouldn't be pharma top priorities, but maybe in fact things that that Gottlieb is going to get done. First, given sort of this political pressure on drug pricing, sort of FDA has emerged as a administrative solution to that issue. And one of the things that Gottlieb has emphasized in that regard is sort of kind of speeding up approvals of generics and perhaps reforming the REMS mechanisms to allow for faster generic approvals. REMS, for those maybe that haven't worked on them, are risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. Basically, they are risk management programs that companies undertake with FDA oversight to make sure that drugs are being used safely in the marketplace. And the idea is sort of that it gives FDA confidence that sort of that they could approve a product with sort of perhaps a riskier safety profile than they are confident than they would otherwise be comfortable with. But sort of these mechanisms, which basically sort of that instruct drug companies to communicate more continuously with manufacturers and sort of to monitor prescription uses perhaps more tightly than they would otherwise, will allow them to get drugs onto market that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be approved. The flip side of that for the generic industry is because of these strictures and controls, they feel they can't get the samples they want to develop products sort of once the patent expires and bring the generic version to market and sort of kind of drive the price down for consumers and for the healthcare system overall to create headroom for the next innovative product that's coming along and will obviously sort of be costly because of the development expense. And so these REMS products themselves can be costly as well. And once again, getting ahead of myself on the slides. So that's an issue that sort of kind of pharma has sort of kind of not been too open to reform on. They sort of see that these are proprietary things that we've developed. We sort of kind of we, in many cases sort of have patents, and sort of kind of why should we be sort of giving away these things, and why are we opening up these programs to whoever wants to join, because it is really sort of a public safety patient safety issue, and it needs to be tightly controlled for those reasons. So sort of kind of how that plays out will sort of kind of in some way affect your kind of when the life cycle of a brand product ends, and it may end up sort of ending faster than companies would like. The other thing to watch for in Gottlieb's FDA that sort of may not be what would be at the top of FDA's agenda is sort of this the question of opioids, and sort of kind of what that means for sort of FDA policy in general. Obviously, sort of opioids is a big public health issue. Sort of, Gottlieb was sort of squeezed on this during his nomination and confirmation process, and so he and the administration sort of feel strongly that that the FDA needs to do something on this. And so what he is doing is tasking FDA to sort of come up with some innovative solutions. Under his watch, they've already pulled a extended release product, Opana ER, that seemed to be actually not reducing abuse, but almost kind of redirecting it into more dangerous forms. And so the next big step that they may take is actually coming out with training on how doctors should prescribe opioids. And obviously everyone wants these dangerous products to be used safely. The theoretical issue for pharma is if FDA becomes comfortable both philosophically and mechanically with telling docs exactly how to use drugs, does this spill over into other products? Does this kind of become a mechanism for limiting off-label use, not just in opioids but in anything else? And sort of so that's something drug companies need to keep an eye on. The potential upside of this opioid crisis is obviously sort of a big thing that opioid sponsors have to think about, and other sponsors have to think about as well. And it's a big distraction for the agency being able to do any other priority, just sort of given how important this is as in the public conscience and sort of as an overall health issue. There is a potential upside because of this. Is that sort of that FDA is going to be monitoring real-world data to look at abuse issues a lot more closely, and that could lead to the agency being more comfortable with real-world assessments and using the real-world evidence. So there's sort of a potential upside there too. And then the third bullet point is something that Gottlieb has advocated in the past about making complete response letters publicly available. He's obviously sort of coming at this from sort of kind of more of a letting industry sort of know how the agency makes its decisions perspective, and the industry isn't necessarily sort of kind of eager to see that for their own products. They would be very interested in sort of seeing what their competitors have to do to sort of get approval, but just like any sort of other proprietary information, they don't want to share that. Gottlieb, in between sort of when he served at FDA in the George W. Bush administration, when he has now come back in the Trump administration, he worked in venture capital, and they obviously were kind of very interested in those sorts of things. And it could be that sort of he would push to get more disclosure on those issues, as he said that it would be good to see when he was outside the agency. Now, bear in mind a desire to sort of get a policy change at FDA does not mean that the policy will be changed. The Obama administration, Josh Sharfstein, when he came in as deputy and as kind of acting commissioner for a bit, he wanted to see a very similar sort of kind of disclosure process, and sort of kind of industry, sort of kind of FDA regulations themselves, and sort of kind of general inertia sort of kind of meant that didn't happen. So whether or not any of those things come to pass, we'll have to see. But those are sort of three potential wild cards that sort of kind of could be non-upsides for a Gottlieb FDA, sort of for industry. So definitely sort of keep your eyes on that. And now we will in fact move to this long promised poll question. So here it is. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on is FDA moving in the right direction in support of getting innovative new technologies to market? Tell us yes or no, and we can talk about the results. All right, while we're compiling these results, I'll move on to the next slide, and we'll circle back once we hear those.
Matt, can I just ask a follow-up question with reference to your talk about the
Please
FDA, because this is really the part of the meeting with. I wondered if you could clarify a little bit about the progress of the FDA Budget Authorization for fiscal year 2018 and the issue, too, particularly about the reduction in force rules for the rest of the federal bureaucracy. Is they affected by that in any way? And also, are there any downsides as the FDA grows to rely on industry fees for a great priority percentage of its cost in drug evaluation?
Great question, Bill. Let me break it up into a couple different parts. There's the user fee legislation, which has to get passed by the end of September for FDA to keep collecting fees and then eventually to keep paying the people that review the application. So everyone expects that to to eventually be passed before that deadline, and that will keep the trains running to a certain extent. In parallel, on a parallel track, if I can continue with this real world analogy for a bit, there is the FDA appropriations, and that's the money that Congress gives out of its own tax piggy bank, not that industry gives out of its own revenue, and that is probably going to be flat or close to flat this year. That's moving along in the House and Senate. When all those appropriations bills get passed is very much a wild card. There's no real deadline in the way that there is a deadline for the user fees, and so that could well slip. We could see a lot of continuing resolutions, that as Congress kicks the can down the road, not because it's FDA funding debates per se, but macro budget issues, the deficit, the debt ceiling, all these sorts of big Washington fights could get hold up in that. And so the good news for FDA is that they will probably get a flat budget. To the extent that the flat budget is good news. That's indicative of how things are in Washington. But with that flat budget, they should have pretty good hiring authority. Commissioner Gottlieb has already succeeded in getting the hiring freeze that President Trump imposed at the beginning of his administration lifted for FDA, so FDA can hire, and he's just Commissioner Gottlieb has just unveiled this new program to reorganize the hiring systems for FDA, and there's going to be a dedicated hiring staff that looks at these things, and the hope is that staff can be comprised of some subject expertise, and so that we can have clinicians hiring clinicians, that we can have statisticians hiring statisticians, and so the hope is that that will go a lot smoother than it has in years past. FDA certainly still faces a lot of macro hurdles on this question. Even with these reforms, it probably won't be as fast as private sector hiring, and given the realities of the federal budget, the salaries won't be as high as private sector sector offers. And so what can FDA, even Gottlieb's FDA, offer to a potential employee? A sense of mission, a sense of renewal, and perhaps as a sense that that they can understand the inner workings and be more valuable if they ever choose to go back to the private sector and work in Pharma and Medtech or wherever they came from. So there is good hiring news on those fronts, and it's probably as good as it's been in recent years, which doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for the agency, but things are looking up. It's not raining. Even if it is, it's still a bit cloudy on that. So thanks for the question.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Matt. I think we need to move on to the next part of the presentation, which is focusing on some of the politics of healthcare. But I do want to tell the attendees that we've had a bit of a glitch in the poll results, but we are going to send the poll responses out to all attendees, and it will be published. So you'll be able to get that helpful data shortly. Anyway, do we want to move on now to the section on healthcare in Congress, the issue of the outlook for Obamacare? And I guess Matt or David, you'll be both covering this.
Yeah, I'll pick it back up. And yeah, thanks for good transition from FDA there, which is, I think, likely one of the high level of interest to industry, but obviously there's a broader set of healthcare market issues and the like that obviously very much impact the both the medtech and pharma space. So right, and really this does pick back up on my original slide on uncertainty. So we're in the middle of obviously really fits and starts in debate in terms of this whole issue of healthcare reform, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and the Republicans wish to repeal and replace that. As I put this slide together just a few days ago, I sort of, there's a suggestion in these slides that repeal effort could be picked back up. It shows just the quickness of change in things that already really right now, as we speak, we're in the midst of that happening. The Senate is moving forward with some plan to try to repeal and replace the Obamacare. It's in a state of not knowing exactly what the bill is at this point, kind of going through different options in a very unusual process. So we are looking at some sort of bills being considered that would involve change in how the individual mandate looks if it exists, and change in Medicaid and the various other things that, depending on how they come out, could have different impacts. And so we are in a period of, it's really hard to say what's happening there, and potentially nothing, but there's a lot of activity. So it remains unpredictable. But at the other side of things, and I'm moving here to the next slide. Actually, for MedTech, and I think Matt will say similar for pharma. The actual impact of these health reform of legislation, for the Affordable Care Act in the first place for MedTech, and now looking at the efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, the market bottom line impact actually hasn't been great in a lot of ways. I have meaning hasn't been large, hasn't been very significant. I have, a little graphic on the right there, just looking at, on the medtech side, what a sort of procedure volume impact would be from this would be from the House bill, the House Republican bill that passed several months ago. But it's similar enough in terms of overall coverage impacts to the other pieces of legislation up for consideration. And essentially, it's relatively small impacts. I mean, the biggest would be, one particular area going to potentially negative 2%, but that's really the largest. So really, there isn't, because of various ways in which the healthcare market works and the coverage works and emergency care works and Medicare not being impacted by these pieces of legislation, it's actually not a vast bottom line impact. Although, of course, hospitals and providers do have concerns with the legislations that are up for consideration, and that could sort of go back to the original product providers in the device and drug industry. But from the medtech side, I'll just touch on first, then pass back to Matt to go into pharma issues in Congress. Really, it's been a tunnel vision, very focused on this device excise tax. That was approved originally in the Affordable Care Act of Obamacare. It's a 2.3% excise tax on device sales. It's been suspended for the past 2 years due to a congressional action, but it's set to restart in January, and that's considered a major job killer by the device industry. It's been something they see as one the biggest issue to address in Washington. And these healthcare bills that Republicans are putting forth, despite all the controversy around them, do include a repeal of the device tax. So that's been a real focus of the industry to try to get that done in this way. As I put on the slide, it looks more likely, that tax will restart in January, because there hasn't been any success so far in repealing it. But going back to things, it's really hard to predict for sure. These Senate bills are up for consideration again today, as if we're following the news. Device tax repeal is a part of really any bill that might be put forth in the next day or two. So it's very possible that could move forward, or additionally some other vehicles, tax reform or other pieces of legislation that may come up offer other opportunities to do that. So we'll have to see. But it's a sort of interesting time of, I think, the best the best solution on the healthcare bill for industry is something, either something gets passed or it's absolutely off the table. But this current process of not really sure where things are going, I think is a difficult time for being able to do sort of long-term business planning. But I know obviously Matt may have some other thoughts from his perspective, so why don't you take it back over, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'll move to that slide and just for a second, what you were saying about the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, has not been a game changer for pharma, just like it wasn't for medtech. If you look at the passage of the legislation, the negotiations in 2009 and then the eventual passage in 2010, it was a complete tactical victory for pharma. They got pretty much everything they wanted. They worked with the Obama administration and Democrats in Congress, and they did have to sort of pay these some fees, but they avoided sort of any kind of real price controls, and in fact they found a path that essentially allowed them to fund patients through this donut hole, this sort of kind of this little bizarre design in the Part D Medicare drug benefit that is almost sort of kind of like not a upfront deductible, but sort of kind of in the middle of your coverage deductible, and let folks keep getting scripts, and pharmacists keep getting paid for those scripts. So it worked out very, very well for them. Since then, almost sort of kind of immediately in the months afterwards, they went back to fighting with maybe fighting is a strong word, but sort of kind of feuding with Democrats and President Obama in particular about how they handle drug pricing, and you can sort of see that in sort of kind of they did not ally themselves with Democrats in the midterms, and those midterms did not turn out well for Democrats, and so not that sort of kind of pharma sort of would have made all the difference there, but there is a fair bit of artillery that the pharma lobbying organization can bring to bear, and they've basically sort of kind of sat things out since then, and very interestingly, they don't have their heads in the sand now, but they're really sort of trying to lie very low on this repeal debate. As Dave was mentioning, I'm not quite sure what's going on. I quieted my phone when the webinar began. There could be all sorts of Senate developments that I'm not aware of in the last half hour or so. So that's something to keep in mind. Moving quickly through here, I actually notice we're coming up on time, and I do want to sort of let people ask questions. I notice we've already got one. If you want to sort of scroll down below your slides on your screen, there's sort of an area to ask questions. So go ahead and do those, and we'll get to those at the end. But let me zip through this stuff, and obviously I can circle back in questions or sort of offline. We'll have our emails at the end, and feel free to sort of ask anything that we didn't devote enough time to or didn't get to at all, and really appreciate everyone being here. So the Trump executive order on drug pricing, again, this is something that's kind of aimed to address the problem of drug pricing by from at least sort of the drafts that we've looked at. This is for kind of pharma-friendly reforms of regulation, and some pausing of some unfriendly CMS regs as well, perhaps. So that's good news for them. Also, good news is that Trump has not been angrily tweeting about drug pricing in a while. In fact, last week he had a great event with Merck and Pfizer talking about American jobs, and I think you can see in a lot of both brand and generic industry announcements that talking about opening manufacturing plants is a way to this president's heart, and the more that industry can do that, the happier the tweeter in chief will be. So that's a good strategy for them going forward. Anything could happen in this freewheeling Senate debate. there may be some drug pricing proposals that sort of come up for a vote, but I would honestly expect not much action on that, but perhaps more next summer as sort of kind of things heat up on the midterm campaign trail. There could be some pressure for to actually kind of quote unquote do something on drug pricing, and there could be a hopefully from Pharma's perspective, sort of a relatively meaningless, but still potentially dangerous legislation sort of kind of passed that would allow incumbents to say that they are sort of addressing these constituent concerns. Although, as we've been saying this whole hour, Washington is crazy right now. If you were to ask me 6 weeks ago, or even really sort of maybe 6 days ago, whether Jeff Sessions might be out as Attorney General, I would have laughed. And now I don't even want to flip a coin on that question. So things are moving very fast, and keeping one's head down is perhaps the best approach in this environment. So I can certainly talk more about all these things. I find them endlessly fascinating, but I will sort of kind of move on to the next slide so we can get to your questions, and I can of course circle back as desired.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I just want to cover quickly, because we are short of time, on 3 issues. Quickly, transactions, taxes, and trade. These are very important. They're transitional issues for pharma, but with reference to transactions, biopharma right now is treading water, especially on the mega deal side. There's less than $13 billion in large U.S. deals so far this year, according to our Data Monitor survey, and that's one of the lowest in recent years in the past decade. There is a positive, which is all the exciting science that's coming out from the labs, but there are also a lot of negatives, and these are mostly political, what tax reform looks like so companies can select their deal financing, conditions for repatriation of the $450 billion in profits the 8 major drug companies have parked overseas. Will share buybacks be discouraged in favor of physical investment? Because share buybacks was the trend when the last time this happened. And then on taxes, President suggests the best outcome will be a modest stimulus, not a comprehensive reform. The big 1986 overhaul was bipartisan. It was time-consuming. It took 3 years to pass into law, and they had a persuasive president in the lead. And there was a lot more money for tax incentives to play with. Right now, the long-term fiscal and public debt position is eroding rapidly. It gives legislators little room to push down the corporate rate to Trump's stated 15% goal without busting the deficit. And, of course, the GOP does not want anything that requires repetitive votes on raising the debt ceiling, even though this is supposed to be revenue neutral. But there's a lot more time debating cutting deductions than cutting rates. That might be difficult. So as far as trade, the administration is going to have, I think, to backtrack a bit from its simple focus on the U.S. trade deficit. That's not the be-all and end-all of trade, as we all know. It's not an either-or issue of selling more and buying less. Trade is very complicated. It affects different businesses differently. And consider Warren Buffett's position that he took a few months ago that the biggest U.S. trade problem is actually the cost of employer-based health care. Now, in the next few months, NAFTA will be the test vehicle for the administration's unfair trade agenda. Talks that begin with the 2 other countries next month could deliver actually a net positive for biopharma if the new bilateral trade agreement between Canada and the EU, known as CETA, that could become the benchmark for looking at IP improvements in the NAFTA agreement. Because as you know, under CETA, the Canadians, who are not noticeably friendly historically to patent protection, it ended its status as the only G7 country without a patent term restoration rule. They're acknowledging now that they get patent holders will get 2 years extension for delays encountered in things like registration. So that's a brief capsule summary of these 3 areas, which are mainly geopolitical in many ways, but have economic implications. But noting what Matt and David just said, we do want to take a couple of audience questions. And one that came up, which I'd like to pose to either Matt or Dave, is that we talked a lot about FDA issues in terms of how the FDA is approaching that tough nut of pricing. But maybe one of you might look at what the CMS may be doing on the SEMA Burma, particularly where the audience is interested in maybe what's happening to that innovation office that was part of CMS under Obama, which considered a lot of interesting proposals around cost effectiveness and others that kind of get around the drug pricing issue in a roundabout way, but still nevertheless the direction was somewhat clear. Any comments about CMS and what it's doing on the pricing front, if it can do anything?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Great question. The executive order on pricing that I mentioned a little bit ago, has a lot of language on that, instructing CMS to be as flexible as it can be in terms of the value-based contracting arrangement, and certainly, the Innovation Center, the MMI, is sort of a way to go about doing that. Like all these sort of kind of administrative levers of power, sort of kind of when you're the party that sort of kind of that holds them, they're great things. Sort of kind of Republicans use a lot of benefit to try and be able to do these experiments. Sort of when the Democrats were doing them under the Obama administration, sort of the proposal that would sort of maybe sort of ratchet down payments for Part B drugs, that was seen as terrible and sort of an overreach and those kinds of things. So it's sort of the value is in the eyes of the beholder, whether it be sort of in terms of a drug contract or a policy mechanism. So I definitely see the administrations are kind of moving forward on that. They are a tough nut to crack in terms of sort of kind of the legal hurdles that companies would have to sort of kind of jump through. There's sort of the question of sort of does this constitute off-label promotion if they sort of kind of communicate things that sort of aren't necessarily sort of in the label about what the drug can do besides what's just sort of been shown in a controlled clinical trial. And there's always the question of sort of kind of whether you would violate best pricing concerns under Medicaid if you sort of kind of agree to let a insurer or some sort of other payer through these pilots get the drug cheap. Does that mean you have to sort of kind of discount it even more cheaply for Medicaid, and sort of kind of perhaps the mechanisms would allow for waivers of those concerns, although sort of how that would sort of kind of work itself out isn't entirely clear yet. So it's not the kind of thing that's going to sort of happen next month or maybe even this year. But I think there's a lot of interest in getting those things off the ground, and this administration will be doing that. I'll let Dave chime in if he has any sort of other thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the MedTech side, it hasn't been taken into the drug pricing debate in the same way. There's a lot of differences in how MedTech is reimbursed and paid for as, as part of procedures in many cases versus rather than, independently as a product. I mean, there, in terms of the value-based, types of demonstration programs and the like, that's certainly been an area of focus on MedTech as well, things like joint hip and knee surgery and cardiac procedures. I think, one signal from this administration is on general and that type of stuff is not interested in overreach in terms of mandatory type programs. So, mandatory value-based, payment programs as opposed to, maybe taking other approaches. So that, is there potential for some of those, some slowdown in adoption? There's been a big, switch in device industry in terms of trying to adopt some of those types of models, but, it's sort of still kind of getting the signals from the administration of how fast that will be going on the MedTech side.
Mm-hmm. Dave, another question from the audience relates to MedTech too, about the agenda for AdvaMed. In addition to the medical device tax repeal, what would you suggest are AdvaMed's top priorities in the Trump administration this year, and who's the MedTech sector's biggest political defender in D.C. these days?
Well, I mean, yes, the device tax is top priority, and FDA user fees are the other one that's been mentioned. I mean, but certainly reimbursement issues are sort of the underlying one that's a big issue for MedTech. A big thing has been how do you get a coverage for like sort of these so-called breakthrough products. Big ticket, new heart valve and the like types of devices, that don't have enough the type of evidence immediately to support, full-fledged coverage in a way that companies think would be helpful to actually getting used and collecting the data. So coming up with new ways of sort of paying for breakthrough products is something industry's been working on a while, and I think they're hoping for more action there under this administration. So that's a big thing. And as far as defenders, I mean, certainly there's the industry has gotten a real a broad sweep of actually support for its idea that it's a job-creating industry and export, more exports and imports, and so there's a number of of lawmakers, including Eric Paulson and Amy Klobuchar and many of the districts that have a strong device group that are big defenders of the industry. So I think they're actually done it pretty well for themselves in sort of getting a broad sweep of defenders. It's just a matter of sort of getting their issues noticed amid the stream of so many other things that are happening on drug pricing and things like that.
Okay, thanks, and we thank the audience for their questions. So we just have one little slide to go, which is try to end the discussion with a bit of sage advice to the C-suite, if that's possible. I mean, one of the key things I think Matt mentioned earlier is that the Trump administration, particularly the president, despite his often divisive tone, has been very approachable, particularly to corporate leaders. And there was a big meeting involving most of the pharma CEOs back on January 31st, and that's been followed up, as Matt said, a couple of times since. So there is a dialogue going. So that's a net positive, because in previous administration that was not so evident. But in terms of looking at the larger picture, which is what you do beyond the lobbying status in Washington, is that, as a corporation, as a cultural, social institution that makes money and delivers results to shareholders and also employs a lot of people, there are a couple of things I think are worth noting in this environment. The first is social responsibility efforts need to be grounded in the grassroots, preferably in those flyover states. Initiatives like STEM, which has been spearheaded by Pharma recently, is a way that brings a lot of different constituents and stakeholders together, and is good for Pharma because it's seeding the science base. The other is your workforce, your own workforce, and if you make that workforce reflecting the diversity of the customer base, that's not only energizing, but it also is good for business. Third, stay close to the science. I mean, the science is the greatest strength, latent strength of the biopharm and device industry, and we have two major developments on CAR-T therapy with Novartis is moving along the patient track, and then you have a very interesting final trial on a promising AIDS vaccine in Africa. It showcases the industry as doing things for patients in industrialized countries, but also looking at the issue of emerging markets and the problem of global poverty and how to promote access to medicines in many, many different delivery settings. It's a good time to be in this business, and Trump wants to win, and there are many wins in fighting disease. And then the definition of risk. I think geopolitical risk has become back on the agenda, but larger elements of risk need to be more integrated in decision-making in the C-suite, and the question of whether you need a chief risk officer is something that some companies have been thinking about, of how you take the risk conversation and make it something more than just compliance and bringing it forward as a goal for all parts of the company. That's important if you look at the exposure that industry now has globally. Outsourcing, that's an issue. Is it a violation of the Trump's Made in America loyalty test? This question has to be addressed strategically. We all know that many drug companies are already pulling back because production costs between the U.S. and places like China are converging, and the technology in manufacture is tougher, and it's harder to do it in low-wage environments. But the messaging must be right. Vendor performance needs to be benchmarked more broadly with real metrics. And finally, politics is all about the moment, but drug and device discovery is a long game. We've kind of hit on that today. The payout is measured in decades. So The advice is always think way ahead. So anyway, our time is up, and we must bring the discussion to a close. I'd like to thank Matt and David and you, the audience, for tuning in today. I understand that the poll results have already been pushed out to the members of the audience, so we wait if you have any questions or dialogue to expand upon those two fundamental strains of data and information. Also, this webcast has been recorded, and it will be available for revisiting on the Informa Pharma Intelligence website. So in the meantime, good business and goodbye from Informa, Invivo, and Pink Sheet. And keep reading. Thank you.